Her Majesty Queen Máxima of the Netherlands has been the UN Secretary-General's Special Advisor on Financial Inclusion for Development since 2009. Her work has taken her to Ethiopia, Myanmar, Pakistan, South Africa, among other places. And the good news is huge progress has been made. Since 2011, the number of people with a financial account has grown by 1.2 billion people. And yet, there are still 1.7 billion with no access to a traditional form of banking. Her Majesty Queen Máxima joins us now. Your Majesty, fantastic to have you on the show. We've spelled out the progress, but also the challenges. Could you just give us a sense of what you understand by financial inclusion and the benefits?
Well, thank you very much for having me today. Yes, financial inclusion is something we have been working on for more than 10 years, and we've actually seen a lot of progress. It is look like a railroad or look like a road. It is the infrastructure that a country needs to have to be able to include everybody in an economic system. It is the opportunity to make payments in a very cheap and efficient way. It is a way to actually make savings in a formal way for a rainy day or to invest in your children's education, to be able to insure yourself against risks, maybe health problems, maybe an accident, but above all also to be able to invest in opportunities and generate income. So we've actually been working very, very hard with many countries, having more than 50 countries around the globe, having had strategies for financial inclusion, and definitely technology is playing a very important role.
I mean, it's advantages and tools that many of us, not all of us, I will admit, but many of us in the developed world simply take for granted. If we look at what happened in light of COVID-19, a shift to digitization, and those of us that could make digital payments did so, others were left in incredibly vulnerable situations and circumstances. What have you seen, and who are the most vulnerable?
Well, certainly this what started as a health crisis, it ended up very quickly in an economic crisis and a social crisis. And certainly in emerging countries, there is an issue of formality. The people that are working in the informal sector are extremely vulnerable because they do not have access to the formal things we all have and we take for granted, like you just said. And also they don't have access to government safety nets. They don't have access to formal insurance services. And also within that, the daily wages, for example, were the first ones to lose their jobs. And within that, the groups that have actually suffered the most certainly are women. They really have taken the most amount of the burden on this issue. Small and medium-sized enterprises, and of course, sometimes farmers and rural people. What we've actually seen in terms of SMEs is, of course, they had to be shut down. Supply chains were actually completely disturbed. And we know from a survey that 2/3 of SMEs around the world have actually seen a decrease in their sales, some of them to nearly 80%. That meant that 1/3 of them had to reduce workforce, which actually ends up in unemployment across the board. In case of women, this is even worse. You know, women that actually, they have to have their own businesses to be able to survive. We know in Sub-Saharan Africa, for example, that 60% of the women-owned businesses have seen a complete loss of their income, 3 times more loss of income than men. So this is something we have to look into a lot more. And the issue with women as well is because they're 25% less likely to own a phone or have access to internet, they cannot really turn their businesses very quickly into a digital option, having more access to markets or being able to sell without contact. So they've actually suffered a lot more. So these issues have been something we've been seeing across the board. And certainly that's where governments have actually jumped in to make a lot of social payments and programs so to, being able to balance these problems.
I mean, that's just an astonishing statistic. Women 25% less likely to own a phone or have internet access. I think that brings it home to all of us in many ways. There are positive cases, though, and I do want to talk about this for a country that had some kind of platform or plan for promoting financial inclusion, and that's Pakistan and how they handled what happened during COVID-19. Can you just explain what you saw there?
Well, the issue is, as you very well know, technology plays a very important part in financial inclusion. Today you can actually receive a payment in your mobile phone, and you can actually exchange that for money in your local merchant. You can actually save through it. You can actually get a credit through, the amount of transactions you do, even if you do not have an asset as collateral. So these are actually extraordinary advancements. Now, a country has to be able to allow to do that. They have to be able to allow innovation, and it has to be safe, and it has to be been able for everybody. So connectivity and having a smartphone or even having a phone is extremely important. Now, like I said before, 50 countries have been working very hard on their financial inclusion strategies. One of them being Pakistan. They've had invested a lot in a robust ID system, identification system. Plus, they've actually changed the regulations that actually make it possible for people to receive money in their digital wallets and their phones. So since the start of the COVID pandemic, they've actually been very fast in actually turning all the social programs into this digital payment. And they've actually reached 17 million people, so which is actually incredible. They haven't been able to do that before. But also other countries, even Togo has had a fantastic mechanism to actually give social payments to people, in which 500,000 or more people have actually received it digitally. But also countries like South Africa have actually done the same. So we've actually seen that the countries have been investing in digital financial inclusion, have been able to very quickly give emergency payments to the most vulnerable in their communities.
Yeah, I mean, we've spoken to many of these fintech players, these startups all over the world, Paytm in India, Paga in Nigeria, and the private sector's understanding, trying to get these people access to financial tools. It's whether the government and regulators sort of understand that and they're all working together. Surely this is the critical piece here. It's everybody understanding it's a collaborative effort.
Absolutely. And there is a role for everybody to have. We call them a set of public goods. You have to have connectivity. If only the urban areas have a connectivity, have a phone, and the rural areas do not have any. I mean, it's talking about mobile money accessible for all is just something that is not possible, right? So, the telecom companies, together with the governments, have to work together to make connectivity really a reality for everybody and for women. How do we actually get cheap handhelds for women? Having a smartphone for women is not a luxury item anymore. Issues like these, like having fair competition, being able to have systems that are interoperable, so the customers can actually have a freedom of choice from one system to the other, with better prices and better options for them to have. So all these issues need to be done from the regulatory perspective, from the government side, also in cooperation with the private sector, because they also have to come up with the products that are right for people. Because there's no use to have a bank account, and they cannot really assess the needs of a woman in the rural areas, that she really needs to have very small, short-term credits, just in case she had illiquid moments, or very much types of savings products that incentivize her to save at the moment that she doesn't have to pay school fees, but when she has to pay school fees, then she can actually disperse it. So being mindful about people's needs and developing those products is also part of the private sector's role. So the cooperation between the public and private sector is here essential. I have a story to make. We have a group of CEOs of cross-sector companies, from consumer goods to technology to telecom to banking. And what we've been doing is actually having them work together in certain markets to really digitize all the merchants in a given region, so that all these mom and pop shops can actually receive mobile payments. They can actually also to the suppliers, but also to the customers. And with that, they have actually much more access to credit and to insurance. And you see that the whole supply chain starts elevating itself in terms of quality. These type of cooperations, not only with the public sector, but also the private sector among themselves, is extremely important.
It actually gives me goosebumps hearing it. It's the idea that you actually tailor the products to the individual, and then it's not just about giving them financial access, it's actually about giving them access to products they can use. It's so important. What we've seen in COVID, has accelerated digitization, the focus, it's emphasized the need. Just in terms of your work going forward and the UN's work, what's the plan now? How do we use this moment, harness this moment to accelerate the progress you've made?
Yeah, funny enough, 10 years ago, I really had to make the case why financial inclusion and why technology was so important. I don't think I have to do that anymore. The issue is now the how, is to really help countries really scale up and really make this a reality and really getting the cooperation between the public and the private sector going. And sometimes it takes a little bit of figuring out how the supply chains work, for example, in the farming sectors, in the rural sectors. What happens with merchants? Can we improve that side? How do we cater a lot more for women? I think there's a lot more work we need to be done on the women needs, on why do women use things and why they don't. How can we actually make them a lot more incentivized for them to save and take better credits and inform them better? I think there's a lot of things we have to learn also to actually cater this probably better for women. And in terms of SMEs, I think digitization will be an extremely important thing that we should be focusing on, definitely.
Well, I'm enthused. I can see you're enthused. Hopefully everyone else watching it will feel the same after this. Your Majesty, fantastic to chat to you. Thank you so much, and I hope you come back soon. Thank you once again. Queen Máxima of the Netherlands there, the United Nations Secretary-General's Special Advocate for Inclusive Finance for Development.